So thank you everyone for joining us. We really appreciate all of you being here. I'm very excited to introduce Dr. McBride. Um, I'm sorry, Dr. McBride. I should know how many books you've written, but I've only started to read your last one. I apologize.
It'll
However,
be a mystery. People can go look it up and see if there's
there you
something.
go. However, as most of you know, because I've included in all of the promotional material about this call tonight, that we have that Shanna and I did a walkthrough with the podcast, the Holy Hurt podcast last year. Incredibly healing and helpful, and I just really want to thank you for that. It was so helpful for our group, and I know I've given you a little overview, but if you just want to jump in and tell us what and start on your that would be awesome.
Yes,
Yeah,
I would love to.
just a quick note for all the participants. Dr. McBride's going to give a short presentation, and then Teena and I will be asking her some questions that have been pre-submitted that we've talked about. And then if there is a little extra time at the last 5 or 10 minutes, if anyone has additional questions, feel free to stick those in the chat, and we will see if we can get to those. Thank you, Dr. McBride.
My pleasure. That's all so important. I'm glad you added it. Okay, I'm going to share my slides. Actually, you know what? I'll just share a couple of things first. So I like as I'm starting with things like this to presence myself on land. And the reason that I do that, especially for those of you who end up getting all the way to the end of my most recent book, Holy Hurt, you'll realize with me how important this is, that we find ourselves on land and know the land that we situate ourselves on. And the two primary reasons for that, I think, first are that land is such an important part of finding our way back to our bodies, to rhythm, to the resource that's underneath us, that's unshakable. No matter what is happening as we deconstruct meaning and social context, there is a mother of sorts who lives in the soil of wind and tree and fruit and land kin and the systems around us that holds us. Sometimes as I negotiate waves of grief or fear, I found myself actually heading down to the ocean near where I live and crawling into the ocean in a way that I let myself be completely held. And I'm remembering that the earth knows how to move and undulate and have waves, and that there's soil underneath us that holds us in the midst of what feels so unsteady. And the other piece is that there's a long history on what we call North America. There is a long history in what we call North America of spiritual trauma that's connected to fragmentation from the land, which means that when we acknowledge the land that we come from, that we begin to repair some of the injuries that exist long before our lifetimes that separated us from people and place. And so I'll name that I am coming to you from lands of Lekwungen speaking people, which are the Songhees and Esquimalt nations here in what we typically call Victoria, BC. So very furthest west point in Canada, right on the coast there. And if it feels like there's a bit much for you, and the bit much is like intellectually much or thematically much, like your body feels overwhelmed, I want to remind you that you can sink your body into the chair you're sitting on. You can take a breath, which can feel kind of like a wave. I was just talking about the ocean, and you can remember that the earth has got you underneath you here. So I want to share just a few little ideas, which really won't do justice to how big the conversation is, but to me feel like a helpful way maybe of framing your conversation, or even for presencing me in the context of my research and literature, so that you just have a sense of how I might be responding to more questions. And then hopefully it feels less surprising, or you have a way to maybe interpret how I see things. I'm going to share my slides here. Okay. So I just want to talk briefly about spiritual trauma, how it affects us, how it happens, what it does to us, how to heal. And again, recognizing that there are volumes and volumes and volumes of things to say about this, but I'll be brief in spite of wanting to share all of the details for hours and hours with you. There's a colleague of mine, Daryl Van Trongren, who is part of a research project that I'm working on called the Spiritual First Responders Project. We are funded by the John Templeton Foundation, and we've been researching people who de-identify from religion, which is our academic way of saying when you have been a part of the social schema, the mental schema, the interpersonal network, the culture, the traditions, the customs, the worldview of religion, of a religious group, of a spiritual group, that to pull yourself from that is not only a change in what you do with your time, it's not only a change in kind of maybe the way you answer some questions, but is a fundamental reorganization of your identity, including your embodied reality. What is it like to relate to the world, how you see yourself? And what we know is that there are typically four reasons why people de identify. De identification is just our academic word for deconstruction. Why do we pull ourselves apart or kind of pull ourselves apart from worldviews, social groups, religious groups? The first is cultural stagnation. This means that we have like better ideas than we did decades ago, and we're like, oh, I know more. I can't believe in a six-day creation anymore. I've seen the science, right? Something like that. Like, oh, it seems like this religion stayed here and culture's just moved on. Simplistic views of suffering. So maybe we were told things like God won't give you more than you can handle, and then we get more than we can handle. Or there's a kind of like looking for the silver lining that doesn't really acknowledge the complexity. We would get into conversations around theodicy here too, like how do we make sense of suffering? And when the story of suffering has been really narrow and simple, and then we see suffering, it can kind of blow apart our worldview and say, this flat view doesn't work for me, doesn't hold the whole dimension of being human. A problematic social or political label, which is a way of looking at how people conflate a certain religious tradition with meaning that you vote a certain way, or you're part of this kind of political leaning, or it means you do these things and you believe these things and you don't believe these things. And people might say, for example, one of the things that comes up in the research would be people would say maybe in the southern US, because it might not be a question that we would hear as much up here in the province that I'm in. But are you Christian? And someone might say, well, what do you mean by that? Like the way that the term means so many different things to different people might mean, what you assume with me doesn't work. And then we get to number 4, which is spiritual trauma. And people de-identify from a religion because of spiritual trauma. Those people tend to have the most difficult experience on the other side of de-identification, because there is not just this doesn't work for me anymore, but I also have this incredible legacy of injury, and I don't have a place or connection or context within which to renegotiate not only what do I believe now, but what do I do with all of this hurt? Which means that groups like yours are incredibly important, not just for um, undoing aloneness, but really for mental health reasons as well. So what is spiritual trauma? What does it mean? How do we make sense of it? Well, we can look at it in terms of the compound nature of the word to say that trauma really means wound. It's from the Greek word that means wound. And the wound is the present imprint of what happened back then that shapes how I feel and see the future. So not only is it the wound that's living in me, but it really disorganizes our orientation to time. And the wound is not just the bad things that happened, but the wound is also what should have happened that didn't. The protection, the care, the education, the support, the skills, the age appropriate introduction to certain topics, and the protection against other kinds of topics that weren't age appropriate for us to get access to. So it's what did happen and what should have happened but didn't, in a way that shapes us, injures us, wounds us. And if we were looking at it from a neurobiological perspective, we'd say trauma requires us moving into a state of overwhelm. So not just I was scared, but something in my system was so scared that I was powerless. I gave up. I didn't get through. My system wasn't able to cope. when we're thinking about spirituality, then, so we think about trauma as the wound, spirituality, the inborn human desire and longing for connection, meaning making, and being a part of ultimate reality. That means that everybody who's walking the earth is spiritual. You could say that religion and spiritual traditions, context are cultures of how people answer meaning making questions. That religions are and spiritual communities are groups of people who, for the most part, agree on this is how we're going to fulfill the spiritual longing. We're going to have these traditions. We're going to make sense of this problem this way. We're going to answer these questions with this sacred text or this practice or this sacrament or this kind of gathering or this ritual. But the desire to make meaning, the desire to feel a part of something and to know that you have purpose and to belong and to ask the question, what are we doing here? Those are human things. Those are spiritual things. So spiritual trauma, when we look at it, it's like it can be a bunch of different things, but generally like a wound or an injury or fragmentation to some sort of that spiritual, that longing or meaning making, or really even the way we answer those questions. Michelle Panchak, who's a philosopher, has talked a little bit about spiritual trauma. And this is kind of my rendition of her definition, which is trauma caused by something that a person closely associates with religion or spirituality, is inflicted by someone who is thought to be a stand-in for the divine, or is said to be justified by spiritual practice or religious beliefs, and occurs because of religious or spiritual practices. Like that definition is enormous, right? It means that there are these injuries, these wounds, psychologically, spiritually, that happen maybe in the context of religious or spiritual traditions, but also maybe in a way that is outside the four walls of a building, but that feels linked in our body. Or maybe it's a social trauma, or maybe it feels like it's something awful that has happened that the community around us said it's good, this is supposed to happen. There can be many different versions of this. And the survivor believes that spirituality or religion is somehow the cause for what happened, and that post-traumatic psychobiological responses are connected to God, religion, or spirituality. And I'm just noticing that somebody is drawing on the slide. So I wonder if maybe one of you folks who are hosting might be able to have a look at that while I am continuing on. Okay, so how does it happen? I'll just go through 5 different ideas, and this comes from research and clinical work. We have control, consequences, compliance, codependence, and culture. These are the ways that we can say, how did spiritual trauma happen? And for many of us, answer the question, how did I stay in something so long when it hurt me so bad? Why? How did I get hoodwinked? What happened? What were the mechanisms of action that made that even possible? The first is we have the abuse of power, which is primarily used to constrain others. There can be interpersonal control. These are people you can or can't talk to. Financial, you must give a certain amount. Physical, here's what you can do with your body or your sexuality. Psychological control, you can think these things or not think those things. Compliance, slow or fast alterations in behavior, motivations, values, and beliefs, which allow us to align with codes and standards in the community. This is our way of saying we become more and more like what's expected of us. So you've been controlled, but then we become compliant with the control. We go along, right? Someone says, be this way, this is who you're supposed to be. And we start to adjust ourselves to fit within that mold. And where this is tricky is that it's often rewarded. And so when it's rewarded, where you're praised, you're considered mature, you're held up as being more valuable, you often get status or leadership or more power, then they become rewarded, they become praised, and there's a connection, there's some belonging, which means that it feels like, oh, this feels good, which can make it really confusing to wonder, like, am I choosing it? Am I not choosing it? Like, oh, because it just feels so good. And as a species, we are wired to want to belong. So it becomes very compelling when we get rewarded for doing things that make us feel like we belong. And what that can mean is as we do more of what we're told is good and we get praised for that, then it can, on the other side, make us feel worse about anything that's kind of non-compliant. Like if we have a thought that disagrees, with the leadership, with the community, then we feel worse about that. And that kind of, there's often shame and anxiety and guilt around that. Codependence. Generally, when leaders demand total allegiance, people lose the ability to trust themselves. We become afraid of trusting ourselves. We learn to disavow the inner wisdom that might tell us this doesn't feel safe, this isn't good. This usually includes disconnecting from our bodily knowings and our emotions. So it's not surprising that in many high control, high demand spiritual or religious groups, there's a lot of emphasis on denial of emotion or impulse or will, to highly prioritize rigid thinking, kind of like thinking, like rigid thinking, and probably also like a lot of the compliance thoughts and behaviors that people were controlled into. So people lose the ability to trust themselves, which makes them very, again, easy to control. So it kind of like works in this circular fashion. When we become codependent, we think, I'm bad, I can't trust myself. Then it becomes easy to go, oh, who am I going to trust? Oh, we have this person over here who is an outsourced authority, a moral authority, who's also then telling us we can't trust ourselves, which makes us not trust ourselves, which makes us look to someone else who we believe we can trust. We lose contact with ourselves and we outsource the decision making for our lives, for our spirituality, onto people and systems that have been deemed trustworthy. And that makes us spiritually helpless. How does this even happen? Well, there's a whole culture around these systems. It's not just one person saying one thing. There's a whole system around it that says this is the way that it should be. This is what should happen. This is good. Or people who are silenced, or people who are compliant in some way. Like, I can't speak up because it's going to be too hurtful, too harmful, too painful. I'm going to lose belonging. I'm going to lose everything. So the culture reinforces, ignores, or condones all of these behaviors. So what do we do? How do we heal? Again, these are complex things to heal from, especially when we're healing not just a behavior. We're not just healing one thing, but maybe even an entire structure of ourselves. Our instinct, especially when we begin to separate from systems like this, can be to completely reject the system and anything inside of us that reminds us of that system, including parts of us that maybe still feel shame or still doubt or still feel confused. For example, we may feel like, I don't believe in the devil anymore, but I'm still afraid of hell. That's a very common thing for people who have spiritual trauma, to come out of a system saying, like, I don't believe in this doctrine, but how come I'm afraid of getting it wrong? So we may have the instinct inside of us to fragment off or shun or judge places inside of us. And instead, what I want to suggest is that healing doesn't mean the thing that maybe we were taught that it means, the kind of total miraculous erasure of the wound, but rather a turning towards what hurts, going towards the memories, the sensations, the ideas, the parts of us that still believe, as if, and sometimes I like to use the image of a matryoshka doll, if you're familiar with the Russian stacking dolls, that we are often presenting ourselves to the world and to ourselves as these, like, the most adult versions of ourselves, but we carry these tiny, teeny little versions of us inside, or versions of us from 10 years ago or 20 years ago that might still believe some of the things that the most grown-up version of us doesn't believe, or they might carry the wounds and the memory of what happened. So being able to go towards those places in us, imagining unstacking the dolls and going to meet the versions that still carry the pain, and listening to them, loving them, accepting them, turning towards them. Healing and recovery often mean remaking the self. And there's often some very specific skills that people need to develop. If we have become very compliant and codependent, we might actually not know how to trust ourselves. We might not know how to think for ourselves or feel connected to our bodies. So the task is often working on building some skills that render us more psychologically healthy and socially healthy. Having grief and pain for everything we went through. It's very, very, very important part of healing to grieve and often to be angry about what was wrong about what happened, And then to embody the self, to get connected to our bodies. Because again, as I mentioned earlier, people who are disconnected from their bodies are much easier to control. So it works very well to disconnect people from their bodies. And we may need to learn how to feel connected to our bodies again. And then we might need to create new meaning making systems and new identities. Who am I now? What do I believe now? What can be big enough to hold the pain of what I've experienced and not constrain me in a way that makes me feel like I'm replicating my old belief system? So those are some questions that you might be able to maybe take a screenshot of, or some specific skills. Like if I was to work at building some of the skills that were missing for me, boundaries, trust. Am I just replacing an old leader with a new leader? Have I taken that pastor who did all that damage, and now who I'm looking for is like a podcast host or a new author to tell me, oh, this will save me from the pain that I'm in. Feeling the pain, not bypassing, asking the questions, what do I believe? What do I keep? What do I throw out? Where do I belong? And then here's the last slide before we get into our questions, but some of the research on embodiment, which is another area of expertise and field of interest of mine, looks at how is our self not just existing in the mind, but our body is a big part of what shapes who we are in the world and what it feels like to be us. And our body carries the memory of the pain. Our body also carries a pathway forward for us. So can I find connection and comfort? Can I learn to be at home in myself? Can I access agency and ownership over my body and voice? This is part of reclaiming a self that we can learn to trust. Can I experience, express, and pursue my desires? What do I want? Not just can I trust myself, but what do I even want? From all the way from, can I want like to have that kind of hobby when I was told it was frivolous? Can I want to listen to that kind of music when I was told I was dangerous? Can I want to be sexual? Can I want to have an appetite? For many of us who grew up in very high control contexts, you're not allowed to want anything. And that goes all the way down to, can I desire food that feels indulgent? And then the awareness of our bodily needs. Can I meet my needs? Do I know what they are? My needs might be for movement. My needs might be for rest. My needs might be for social connection. Does my body actually need touch? What do I need? And then can I experience my body as just like a place where aliveness is? Especially for many of us who have been told that the only thing that is pure and right and good happens out there. It is transcendent. It is, you have to die in this lifetime to get to the things that are really good and really alive, which means our bodies become this obstacle for truth, connection, purity, aliveness, sacredness. To look at it through the lens of immanence, not transcendence, but immanence. Where is the sacred revealing itself in my body right now? How is my body alive in the same way that nature is alive? And what does that mean for me about my ability to be connected to all things? Okay, so there you go. There are some ideas. I'll stop sharing my screen now. Thank you for listening to me share
Thank you.
some of
That
those ideas.
was beautiful and a lot of information, I
Yeah.
know, in a short amount of time. But
Mhm.
we are recording this so people can go back and look at that information and kind of see what resonates and what they want to look more into. I think when we look at what we've been through as a community, and as people are starting to go through the healing process, a couple of common feelings are the feelings of not being good enough. And I think you touched on both of these, not being good enough, and then the feeling of fear of
Yeah.
failing or fear of being wrong as we move forward. And maybe our beliefs are changing, maybe they're not, but maybe they are. And fear has often been a driver for us. So, how do we work
Mhm.
through those feelings of fear and not feeling good enough?
Mhm. So when I think about the question, I hear it through the time orientation of past and future. Because fear, when we look at it through the lens of my discipline, you might often hear someone in the psychology or psychotherapy world say, "Tell me what you're afraid of, and I'll tell you what's already happened." And
Mm,
in this instance, the what am I afraid of? What do I think is going to happen in the future? of like, what can I explore these beliefs? Can I try something new? Can I try something different? And then the assumption or the projection, if I do, I'll feel like a failure, I'll be bad, I'll be wrong, tells us about what's happened. And sometimes it goes all the way back to the beginning, to being a kid and thinking, well, could this be the way the world works? Or can I want this thing? Or can I have this interest or this hobby? Or can I do this with my time? Or can I express myself in my body this way? And being told, you're a failure, you're wrong. So the idea of, as we think about moving into the future, what are the things that I'm afraid of? Well, if we're afraid of being judged or shamed or made to feel wrong or bad, it's probably because we were already shamed or judged or made to feel bad or wrong. And so, what we're doing is we're meeting the younger versions of us who carry the memory of how much judgment and how much control and how much shame there was. So, a way to relieve ourselves of the fear, I have another point to this in just a moment, but the way to relieve ourselves of the fear of what happens now and in the future is actually often to go back and to have conversations with the younger versions of ourselves who were so controlled, who had such high consequences and stakes for getting it wrong, and who were shamed as a way of being controlled. Shame is a very powerful tool for control because it feels so awful inside of us that we'll do anything we can to avoid it. So if we can go back and have conversations with younger us, or if we can even remember, like, oh, the fear of being shamed isn't connected to anyone in the present moment shaming me. It's connected to the memory of having been shamed. It's almost like we can send it back to the past. Like, oh, that shame doesn't belong in the here and now. There's no one who's going to stand in front of me and say, you're not allowed to think that anymore. That actually belongs to a community I'm not a part of anymore. So I'm going to send the shame all the way back to them because it's not really even my shame, it's their shame. They put it on me. It belongs to them. It was their ideology. It was their behavioral control. Remind myself, I'm all grown up. I left. I don't have to have the same rules. I can think differently. I'm safe to think for myself. So remembering the fear and the shame belong to younger versions and the judgment belong to younger versions and contexts that we are in. The second thing about fear and shame is that it might seem kind of confusing to think about at first, but they're both emotions that are mediated by connection. So shame is an emotion that serves to keep us in connection with other people. What do we do when we feel ashamed? We cut off the thing that we're told is bad so that we can be perceived as being good and we can stay close to people. So shame has a relational function to it. Interestingly, the antidote to shame is people saying, I'm still with you. I see that thing, that new belief, that new idea. I'm not going anywhere. I in fact have the same questions or the same beliefs. And when we know that there is connection that is sturdy and sure, in spite of the thing that brings up the shame, then the shame doesn't have the same kind of power because shame can only work if there's also like the threat of a relational cutoff. If we have secure connection available to us, the shame is just not, it's like kind of starving it. It's like starving a fire, like not giving it oxygen or fuel. It's just going to die out. So there's that. And fear, interestingly, fear usually tells us that we need a little bit more connection to be able to walk towards what's scary. So there's been some really fascinating research on this within the last 20 years or so that shows if we have, like you can imagine being on a roller coaster and squeezing someone's hand and going like, this is terrifying, but like I got you by my side. Or if you've ever had the privilege and terror of like cliff jumping, I've had experiences of being on a cliff, like I'm scared, but okay, someone's with me. And you're like, okay, 3, 2, 1, and you both jump, like I got you by my side. And so when we have connection, we can actually walk towards things that are scary because we know that our fear will be accompanied. It's almost like, there's the scales of like fear when there's enough connection in contrast to too much aloneness, fear becomes more tolerable. And we don't have to make the choice of, will I walk towards the scary thing or not, based on if it's scary or not? It's like fear can be there, But if I have enough connection, then I can move towards what's scary, like asking big questions or remaking my worldview. So if we have connection in the shame, if we have connection in the fear, we can keep moving towards building a life that's meaningful and figuring out what now without the shame or the fear becoming these overwhelming things that kind of like block us.
That's so helpful. Thank you.
Thank
Mhm.
you. So this kind of leads into our next question, which was, how do we work through our distrust of others from our experiences of betrayal and hurt to find community and grow relationships?
Mhm. I think mistrust after big relational injuries like this is actually really appropriate. The
Mm.
thing that we don't want is to completely suppress the mistrust or completely let it take over. We almost want it to be like a sieve. So if you can imagine trust like a colander or a sieve, you want to think about the interlacing of the metal strands to be big enough that they catch the stuff that you want them to catch, or big enough that you want them to let through what you want to let through, and fine enough to catch the things that you want them to catch. So if I am rinsing rice in a sieve, I want to make sure that the holes are not bigger than the rice. You want to like to have the space for things to get through, but not so much space that things that get through shouldn't get through. So if you think about how that relates to trust and like operationalize it, how do we actually turn that into something practical? That means recognizing I want to be on the lookout for the really, really big things. And what I'd said previously, control, codependence, compliance, culture, right? That there's this like all of these components, like those we want the sieve to catch. But connection, people who are saying like, I want to get to know your story. I want to be friends with you. Let's build something together. We want those things to come through. Those are actually part of what makes a really meaningful life. And what often helps us sort the difference between those is time. Because a lot of times when we're getting to know people, we don't know, like, is this going to hold up? Someone's saying something really nice to me. Are they trying to manipulate me? I'm not sure. It actually takes a little bit of time to see, is there follow through? Are the people doing the thing that they say they're going to do? Are people actually just waiting for a chance to control me when they realize that they can use me for something, or what's going on behind the scenes? So I think the tentative approach where we're like, I'm going to get close to you, but I'm not going to give you all the access to my bank account. And I'm also not going to prevent you from ever getting to know anything about me. And sometimes when we're using analogies of trust, or when we're building analogies for trust, we could think about a jar. Like we want to fill the jar. The jar is like how much we trust. And if that jar is full of experiences that prove to us that we can trust, then it makes sense that we would have a lot of trust. So the big experiences, are those the people that show up for you and help? Do they let you be themselves? How about boundaries? You set a boundary and they're like, I'm so glad you're telling me. Thank you for letting me know that that doesn't feel good for you. How do we handle conflict? Do they let me be myself, or do I have to be exactly like them in order to belong? Can I think for myself? Can I stay connected to my body? Can I go slow? You could imagine filling a jar of trust by having how you answer each of those questions. So you set a boundary, and someone's like, great. Yeah, that doesn't work for you. Awesome. That's not something that happens in high control context. People do not like people to have boundaries when they want to control them and have and consume them. You're like, oh, okay, you let me have a boundary and that feels good. Great. That's like a big hunk of marbles in that jar. And maybe you say to someone, I think differently about it. That I don't agree. And they go, yeah, you know what? I'm so glad to hear your opinion. These are some of the things that I agree or I believe in, and I would, the rest of us agree on, but it's actually cool for you to be here and not agree on those things. Great. If you add some more marbles to the jar. And as you test relationships and as you get closer and you have some conflict and you set some boundaries and you express yourself, you get to see over time like what kinds of things go through the sieve or not. or what
So
kinds of things fill the jar or not. Yeah.
yeah, thank you. I just kind of want to build on that a little bit because many of us, of course, because we're coming from decades of being in a high control religion. So we have
Mhm.
family members, we have close friends who are still a part of that religion. Some of them have, like are holding, I think they would think of it as holding space for us and our journey while they're
Mm.
still in, right? So
Mhm.
how do we navigate relationships that feel a little bit like betrayal or a lot like betrayal, in which like loved ones choose to stay in a system that personally harmed us? And honestly,
Oh,
I
yeah.
could truly say until like this crisis that we all that like caused and some people were awake before but some of us only woke up like not wake up, I'm sorry, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but some of us only realized that the system we were in was harming us in the last 2 to 3 years. But now that we've
Mhm.
recognized it, how how do we navigate that feeling of betrayal and where people
Oh,
that we
yeah.
love and who love us have chosen to stay in? And I'm
Yeah.
actually, my husband still is a part of this religion, and and
Oh,
myself
wow.
and my kids are not. So
Yeah.
that's a very real conversation for me.
It's very real. Yeah. I don't know if there's anything we can do in these circumstances sometimes but grieve.
Yeah, because it's hard, like that trust
Yeah.
you said about the sieve, like it's really hard
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
know.
It feels, yeah. And I think that there's just, there's just so much heartbreak that comes from feeling like the people that we thought we would have forever on our team, who had made promises to us, who we knew, who are our entire network, maybe include people who have, supported
And
us financially or supported us relationally. There's profound loss. And I think I just wish there was more to say, but to acknowledge that this is heartbreaking. And I don't know if we have very good rituals in our culture at large around how to grieve people who are still living and grieve years lost to systems that were abusive. But these are very, very real losses that need to be
because the
grieved.
other side of that coin too, Dr. McBride, and I don't imagine I'm the only one feeling this way, is that in some ways I feel like I've let my husband down because he hasn't
Mm,
changed who he is, but I have changed, and I feel for very valid reasons, but I have changed what I believe
yeah,
in. So there's that side of it
yeah,
too.
yeah. I think you're right? That it's a beautiful, painful thing to be able to realize that we don't have to stay in systems that hurt us and to lose people who we love along the way. And I think developing rituals around grief and releasing and mourning, I think the ability to tolerate the heartbreak, to let yourself have the heartbreak from time to time, like really let yourself have the full extent of the grief and the heartbreak as if you could grieve in the same way that you grieve at death. And I'm thinking about the what it is like to be able to see in more complex ways than often those systems allow. To be able to see in complex ways allows us to recognize that we can think critically now, and not everybody who's inside the system can think critically, and that there are some things that people haven't been able to see and have been so, like, I think that it's not always the easiest thing to do, but there can be some comfort in the compassionate perspective that people who've been indoctrinated have been so disconnected from the ability inside of them to think critically and feel in a way that propels them towards health, to be able to make decisions for themselves, to think for themselves, to have connection to any kind of self that would say, this is not working. Um, it's really, really hard, but it can sometimes help us understand, like, oh, wait, maybe I was able to retain some kind of connection to a self that helped me get out. And these people had that kind of self so squashed that the instinct inside is so inaccessible to them. and the thought of change and the indoctrination that goes into disconnecting from, yeah, any instinct to get out. Yeah, that's really, really, really buried. It's a painful thing. I'm so sorry.
Thank you.
Sorry about that. Yeah.
Yeah, it has something.
I love that you mentioned grief. I think this is something
Mhm.
that has come up a lot in our community for various reasons, like what Teena was talking about, and just like grieving many things in our past as we start looking at those memories and those pain, those spots that hurt.
Mhm.
Do you have any resources or recommendations of how to grieve, like how to turn towards that and
Mm.
be supported in grief?
Yeah. I think there's sometimes there are things that are almost like sacred scripture adjacent, especially depending on what your relationship with sacred scripture is. There might be something in a sacred text that still feels accessible to you, or maybe not. But poetry, um, I think poetry is really beautiful as a way of putting words to the places inside of us that we don't have words for. Reading other people's poetry. I think rituals around grief, like letting ourselves. I'm trying to think of some specific examples which might be really helpful. Journaling, writing letters to people who we're not in contact with to say, this is how you've hurt me. This is what I miss about you. I'm letting you go. Like letter writing that we never send. Sometimes
We
burying a
really
letter.
love that.
Pardon?
I really love that idea, actually. I've never
Yeah.
done that, but there's some people who are really close to me that have distanced themselves because they don't
Yeah.
feel like I'm a safe person anymore. And
Right.
I really do love
Right.
that idea of just writing a letter. Hey, this is
Yeah.
how you hurt me. And I don't ever have to send it to them, but it would help me
Yeah.
to get it onto paper and
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
keep it inside.
Even trauma processing therapies, things like EMDR or
Yeah,
somatic
I'm doing that.
experiencing, right? Where EMDR really allows us to access the emotion and allows our brain to begin to reorganize how it's conceptualizing experiences and self. I think even rituals like this one I got from a colleague of mine, Sarah Van Tongeren. She has clients, she's a therapist, she has clients go out into the wilderness and build something, a little structure, a statue, like maybe it's in a Inukshuk with rocks and leaves, or kind of like create a pattern on, the path with leaves or sticks, and then take the same walk day after day after day and watch how it decays. So recognizing that there is like something that was, what is that the symbol of? Is it my certainty? Was it my community? Was it who I thought I would be? And then letting it decay, right? Watching how nature just knows how to let things end in a way that reminds us that the process of letting go, nature knows how to do it. I think even grief rituals, like I think these are grief rituals and death rituals as well, like memento mori rituals, but like cut flowers from the garden and let them stay inside long past when they're alive, to watch how they die and recognize like, oh, this is the symbol of things that nature just knows how to decay, and it can trust it. It's safe to let it go. Hmm.
That's really helpful. Wow. Thank you.
What would you say are the characteristics of a person in the process of healing?
Mm. I think it's really hard to heal from something that we don't acknowledge exists. It's really hard to heal something that we still think is okay and we're clinging to. Like healing often allows, there's some flexibility to let things be reorganized, to look at them, I'm thinking of something like, this is my AirPod case, but just imagine like I need it to be a certain way. But as soon as we start to be able to turn something on its head and look at it and pull it back here, and kind of this, if this symbolized an event or relationship, our ability to like to kind of negotiate with it, especially when there has been so much rigidity, like, oh, it can only stay here, it can only look this way. But when we start to go like, oh, I can flip it on its head and do all of these things, there's the beginning of healing there, of like flexibility, adaptability. And I think in terms of characteristics of people who are doing healing, often there's more flexible thought. That's part of the nature of it, that rigidity in thought and behavior is often a component of high control religion and high demand religion. So the ability to adapt, like, I'm just not going to do that thing. And I'm not a horrible person. Oh, okay. I'm not going to beat myself up about doing that thing. It's like all of the things that we do can be organized by being more flexible, when typically I have to do this and then I have to say this and I'm supposed to feel this way about it. And then this is what I'm supposed to do to make up for how bad I am. Like, maybe I'm not going to do any of that anymore. Right. That's inherently some flexibility. People who are working on their self-talk, people who are working on their relationship with their body, people who are not just trying to get away. Like, I think that's a really important part of healing, is creating safety. Can I get away? But then can I also look back at what hurt me? And then can I build a new life now on the other side? Those are kind of like the three ingredients we would look for in the healing of complex trauma, which is a kind of trauma where there's like years and years and years of mind control and social control and behavioral control and abuse and neglect and all the things. So can I get safe? But then can I revisit and reprocess what happened? And then can I, on the other side of that, say, okay, what does it look like to build a life of meaning now? It's not too late. I can still build something beautiful.
Yeah. Okay. Another question, and you touched on this, about us coming from a place where we didn't know how to trust ourselves inherently,
Mhm.
where we heard lots of messages that outsourced our knowing to other
Mhm.
places, whether it was to the Bible or to someone in the church or to a parent. So when we've been conditioned to rely on other people for that sense of self, for that sense of validation of what should we do next, like, how do we learn to trust ourselves?
Mhm.
How do we start taking steps in that direction to, um, yeah, to get back in touch with ourself and feel that
Mhm.
groundedness?
Yeah. Trusting ourselves isn't just a single one-time thing, in the same way
Mm.
that trusting another person doesn't come from a singular moment. Like, maybe someone really shows up for us and we go, hey, you really got my back. But if every other time they drop the ball, it's going to be hard to trust them. So think of trust as a process that emerges over time, and relieve yourself of the expectation to have self-trust immediately. Like, let it take a
Mm.
few years, let it be something that unfolds. And when you think about the things that help you trust other people, those are the things that will also apply to how you trust yourself. So, what helps us trust other people? Perhaps when they say they're going to do something, they do. Or when they say they're going to do something and they can't, they let us know why. And there's a really good reason for that. So if someone says they're coming over at 5 o'clock, if they say, oh my gosh, I'm supposed to be there at 5 and I'm stuck behind this like train and I'm running a few minutes late, I'm so sorry. I acknowledge, like, oh, that I violated our agreement. So even like when there's a rupture or there's something that kind of breaks a boundary in a way that and there's an acknowledgement of that. Well, what would that be like if we did that to ourselves? We said, I'm going to feed myself when I'm hungry. Or I'm going to get up in the morning and I'm going to do this kind of ritual for myself. Or when I have a scary memory come up, I'm going to say to myself, you're safe, you grew up, you got out, it's not happening anymore. Or I'm going to be kind to myself. So, what's the commitment that we're going to make? And then can we keep our commitments to ourselves? So that's one part of trust. Another part of trust would be time spent together, just like time together. Do you spend time with yourself? Do you meditate? Do you enjoy your hobbies? Do you notice what you're thinking about and how you're thinking? Do you revisit the story of your life? Do you just do things that you enjoy for the sake of enjoying them? You do spend time together. And then I think the third thing around that is like, how do we handle ruptures? What's the way that we deal with the hard stuff? And in those moments with friends, your real friends are the ones who they show up and they're kind and they got your back and they're wanting to, they're acknowledging in some way how big it is. So what would it be like if we did that for ourselves? And I think over time, if we turn our relationship towards ourselves and we start to notice information, like we start to notice from our body something that says, I don't feel safe. But how is your body ever going to tell you I don't feel safe? And for you to have any clue what to do with that when you haven't had any practice listening to your body.
Mm.
But take some time, like spending time, like, oh, what do I feel inside? What's it like? And not expecting to know right away. But, for many of us who have intimacy, there's like something about intimacy and trust that feel relative to me or related. If you have a best friend, you go to a party, you're both at the party and someone makes a joke and you look at each other from across the room. You're like, we were going to talk about this in the car on the way home, right? Like that kind of knowing glance. You're like, I heard it too, right? That funny thing. Like there's some intimacy where someone doesn't even have to say, hey, did you hear that joke? It's like a look, right? But that comes from years and years and years of friendship and laughter and conversation. And the same is true of us with our bodies. That the more time we spend noticing what's happening for me, the easier it is to develop a kind of shorthand. So if I'm feeling there, like if I'm about to get into a car, someone's going to pick me up and I'm about to get into a car and there's something inside that doesn't feel like this is not safe to get into this car. But I've been told for years and years and years, don't even listen to your body. I have no chance of paying attention to that sensation. But if I'm doing the slow work of, my body says, I'm thirsty. Okay. And I go take a drink. My body says, I'm tired. Okay. And I go lay down or I say, oh, yeah, no wonder you're tired. That's kind of like learning to speak the language of our bodies. And over time, I'm going to have more awareness when my body says, don't get in that car because I practice listening when I'm in the garden and when I'm tired and when I'm at a friend's house and when I'm full and when I'm hungry. Like I've listened in all those little ways that accumulate to me being able to trust when the sensation or the gut instinct says, this is scary. And then what can happen when you start to notice and that it's scary is here, then you can also start to go, okay, this feels scary. Thank you, body, for telling me. Is it scary because it's the same and I need to run?
Mm.
Or is it scary because I could get hurt again and I don't want to get hurt, but it is actually safe? And
Mm.
it takes time to like negotiate with yourself. You have to have a lot of credit, so to speak, of
Mhm.
like noticing those instincts and trusting them. But I want to give everybody here full permission for that process of noticing, listening, building trust, negotiating to take many years.
Mm.
But if you practice listening, figuring it out with the little things, it becomes much easier to hold the intensity of the bigger things. Like, is this going to happen again? Am I safe? Am I not? What do I need to do with this impulse? That actually is the end result of, I was full and so I stopped eating. Oh, I wanted a hug and I asked for one. And then I was too long and I said, okay, the hug is over now. I'm done with the hug.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And that's really reassuring too, just to
Mhm.
have the right expectations too of the healing process.
One of the things that maybe makes CCF a little bit, so that's our group, Connected and Concerned Friends, a little bit unique over some other groups is that we have people who still attend as well as people who have left.
Mhm.
And I want to honor those people who do still attend and who do choose to show up for some really hard conversations on CCF. Like we really appreciate them.
Mm.
But how do the people who choose to stay, how do they navigate the feelings of guilt for choosing to stay in a system that harm them or their loved ones?
Yeah. I think the guilt is really important to stay with because it tells the truth about the complexity. Like if we were staying and we didn't feel the guilt, we probably wouldn't be feeling and connected to the pain of the people we love. And if we were feeling so much guilt, perhaps that would drown us in the ability to be connected and care and be sensitive to the injuries. I think that guilt is a really important thing to negotiate because sometimes guilt says, this is wrong. I should leave. I should make a change. But maybe I'm too scared or immobilized to. Sometimes guilt says this is out of alignment with my values. And that's where we can start to split this and say, okay, what am I feeling guilty about? Like, oh, is it aligning with people who've been abusive? okay, maybe that's actually not how I want to live. How do I support myself to come out of alignment with people who are abusive? Or is the guilt that people who I love over here have hurt people I love over here? Oh, and I'm like, I feel caught in the middle. Okay, what's my value here? I don't want people to get hurt in the way they've been hurt. Okay, what can I do about that? So guilt is sometimes neurotic and sometimes helpful. Is the guilt immobilizing us? Is the guilt turning us into being able to take action to change what's happening? Is the guilt immobilizing us so we're not doing anything and then we just feel guilty and we just stay where we are? Like, well, that doesn't help us feel good either. Like guilt is meant to be so uncomfortable that something resolves. And if it's not resolving, then we might need to think about like what that is. Or if sometimes there is the complexity of just saying like that I don't know what to do next. And part of me not knowing what to do is because I'm getting a need met over here and I'm feeling the pain over here, and those are in conflict. And it's not actually guilt, it's like conflict inside of I don't know what to do because this matters to me and this matters to me, and I feel stuck. And I can't ignore that these people are hurt. I can't ignore that these people are doing the hurting, but they're also meeting a need of mine. So I think just spending some more time digging into like, what is it guilt? Why do I feel guilty? Do I need to do something about that? Is there conflict? What's creating the conflict? Like usually there's just a lot more.
Is it
Mhm.
simplifying it by saying that that might be like kind of a little bit of cognitive dissonance?
No, I think that that's absolutely a part of it. The cognitive dissonance that we sometimes feel that we then try to resolve by just like getting away from it or like I'm going to ignore it. I'm not going to look. I'm going to cut that off and just stay with the dissonance actually stretches us to know ourselves more. Like, why is there dissonance? What does that tell me about who I am inside and what matters to me?
Mhm. Well, thank
Has
you
it been
so much, Hillary. This has been a wonderful hour spent with you. I'm already looking forward to going back and listening again
Me too.
to really dig in and understand. So thank you. We appreciate everyone who's on the call tonight too. And it's been a healing time together.
Thank you so much for having me and for your courage to ask and the openness to invite me in so that I could bring some insights and some of my giftings into this context. My hope is that they feel like they are useful and that you can come back to them over and over again, and that the things that felt true now can be true in 5 years if you need them then, or in 5 more years if you need them then.
Maybe could
Absolutely.
you just maybe wrap it up just a little bit about your latest book? I have it, but if you could maybe just share a little bit about it, I think there's a lot in there that could help a lot of people.
Yeah, so I wrote a book called Holy Hurt, which is all about understanding healing and healing from spiritual trauma. And so just much more depth of some of the concepts we're talking about tonight. What are the impacts of spiritual trauma? How do we heal? How do we meaning make? What do we do when we feel culpable? Why does it happen so much? So you can get that book anywhere books are sold.
Thank you so much, Doctor.
Yeah,
I'm sorry,
thank
I
you
keep
for having
saying
me.
Dr. McBride, but you're
Okay.
fun now.
Yeah. Take
It's
care,
really
All right.
nice
everybody.
Thank you,
to
everyone.
hear your voice actually talking to me. Thank you.
Good night.